Okay, folks, let's get started. My name is Satish Ramade. I am co-chair of Programs Committee, Washtenaw County Democratic Party, along with Eli and Nathan. Welcome to our general membership meeting. Thank you for joining on the Labor Day weekend. We have, as you can see from the screen, my shared screen, we have a full packed agenda and discussing quite important topics. We're going to start with your candidates corner. We have our Supreme Court Justice candidates and also from presidential candidate, representatives from presidential candidate. So I'm going to hand it over to Chief Justice Mary Bridget Mccormick for her pitch for her re-election. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for giving us an opportunity to meet with you this morning. My name is Bridget McCormick. I'm the current Chief Justice of the Michigan Supreme Court. I was elected to the court 8 years ago, only thanks to all of your work and your help. As everybody on this call knows, candidates for the Supreme Court are nominated by parties, but we appear on the nonpartisan section of the ballot, and a recurring problem is that many people who vote the straight party ticket don't cast any vote whatsoever for their Supreme Court candidates. We have always tried to figure out how we can do a better job communicating to voters about which candidates reflect their values. I am grateful that you are giving some attention to this race right now, and I hope we can keep talking about it between now and November 3rd. In addition to my race, and you're going to hear from the other candidate in a second, Elizabeth Welch, we have an open seat on the court. And it's a tremendous opportunity this year. And in Elizabeth Welch, we have a fantastic candidate who's running a terrific campaign. I don't think I have to remind any of you about how important the court's decision-making function is. You get that, you've witnessed that, you follow it. We make important decisions and the final decisions in so many issues that affect all of our families, communities, and our entire state. And they're the hard questions. Only the hard questions make it to the Supreme Court. So it matters who is there making those hard decisions. I want to emphasize, however, briefly, the administrative oversight constitutional role that the court has. In addition to our decision-making function, the state constitution charges the Michigan Supreme Court with administrative oversight of all of the courts of the state. Michigan has 242 trial courts. They hear literally millions of cases every year. And so the kind of justice that people get in our trial courts, the quality of that justice depends in large part on the administrative leadership of the people who sit on your Supreme Court. And let me give you a couple of examples of how, with that hat on, we can make a really important difference in our communities. In my particular work, I have spent a lot of time in the last year and a half co-chairing with the Lieutenant Governor, the Governor's Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration. Michigan's county jail populations have tripled in the last 30 years, even though crime is at a 50-year low. We had no statewide data to understand what was driving that increase. And when you have no data, it's easy to just shrug your shoulders and not figure out how to dig in and do anything about it. The task force, with the help of the Pew Charitable Trust, collected statewide data. Also best practices nationally. We heard from the public all around the state, and we came to 18 consensus recommendations that, if enacted, will make Michigan a national leader in this front-end criminal justice system reform. I am very proud to say that about 2/3 of the recommendations are already in bill draft. Many of them have had hearings. A number of others are going to have hearings in the next few weeks. It's no time to take a victory lap, but it is absolutely time to keep our foot on the gas and continue to push for these reforms. A second example I want to briefly tell you about is the Justice for All Task Force, which is aimed at the civil justice gap. In Michigan, 8 out of 10 people cannot afford lawyers when they go to court for civil legal matters. So if you're being evicted, you have a family law matter, a small consumer debt matter, you have to manage the court system on your own. That undermines the foundation upon which the rest of the justice system is built, equal access to justice, and the Justice for All Task Force is aimed at achieving 100% access to the civil justice system within 3 years. It's a very ambitious goal. But we have lots of good ideas for how we can get there and make Michigan's courtrooms places where everybody, regardless of income, can access justice. And finally, this public health crisis has turned me into somewhat of a technologist and an entrepreneur. All of those courtrooms had to figure out quickly how to do business and protect public safety. They all have been hearing their dockets on the Zoom platform and live streaming to YouTube. Michigan has become a national leader in this way. We are the very first state in the nation to provide online dispute resolution that is free and can be done with or without a mediator to everybody in the state. There is a lot more to talk about under this sort of administrative oversight role, but I just want to make sure everybody understands how important the court can be in the way people experience justice in their local communities. And I want to go back to where I started. The election for me, if I win and Elizabeth Welch does not, will not be a successful election. I am going to spend every minute I can in the next few months working to make sure that Elizabeth Welch is also elected. We have an opportunity that we haven't had in a long time. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you. I don't know if your time allows for questions. I'm happy to answer them. If it doesn't, if it does, I'm also happy to shut up now if it doesn't.
Yeah, we can go with Elizabeth Welch, and if we still have time, we can come back to that.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. I guess I'll jump in there then. Thank you, Chief Justice. I think I won't talk long. So we have found that these Zoom dialogues are actually very, very substantive. People really do dig into some of the things the court does. And so I think we will have time for questions if your agenda allows, because it won't take long. Hi, everyone. I met many of you at your Candidates Corner. I came in person. It was literally just days before the shutdown, I think, so maybe a week. So it was a strange time. Everybody kind of knew this was coming, but we hadn't quite shut down yet. So I am really honored to get the opportunity to talk to you and get to know you a little better through this platform. So for those of you who don't know me, I have been practicing law for 25 years. I'm an employment law attorney over in Grand Rapids. I work with small businesses, nonprofits, and individuals on employment law matters. And what that means for the last few months of my practice is I have become a bit of a COVID-19 expert in the workplace. Anybody who practices employment law knows, I see Congresswoman Dingle is on the call, that a lot of the solutions that were rolled out are through the employment place, or through the employment system. So whether it was unemployment expansion or paycheck protection program loans, all of that came through employment. And of course, workplace safety through the governor's orders. So that is something I have not expected to become an expert on when I launched this, but indeed it is a skill set I now have that I certainly will be bringing with me. I also, just as importantly, I think, as my daytime law practice is a lot of the work I've done outside my law practice, certainly using my legal skills and particularly advocacy skills. I worked closely with many folks, even in your own region, on public school advocacy. I do live just a few miles from Betsy DeVos. Her agenda was pretty aggressive the last 20 years when it comes to public schools, and worked really hard with parents, starting in my own region, but then expanding statewide, to work hard to support public schools in all corners of our state, all of our children. Eventually ending with the privilege of being invited to be part of something called the School Finance Research Collaborative. Oakland schools took a lead on this, pulled together a statewide coalition that studied the true cost to educate a child in our state. So was very actively involved with that. Also very involved on voter protection issues and election law issues, overseeing the program in West Michigan in 2016 and 2018, ending with over 200 volunteers out at the polls, really expanding into kind of the inner ring suburbs around Grand Rapids, places we hadn't been before, and we needed to be. It was sort of stunning, some of our findings with some of the clerks that we now try to work with and educate. Particularly after Proposal 3, big changes in how voting happens, working with clerks to try to make sure they're ready for what we knew was going to be a crush at the clerk's office if people are registering same day. So did that work for really going back to 2004, but a lot in the last 5 years. And then finally, I am the past board president of the Michigan League of Conservation Voters, headquartered over in Ann Arbor, but now has offices all over the state, including Grand Rapids. Really privileged to work with lots of strong leaders around the state, many of whom are from Washtenaw. So I stepped forward for this particular seat. I had talked to the Chief Justice. It's almost been 2 years now. It's hard to believe. There's this open seat. It's a huge opportunity, and it's one, frankly, we have to work really hard to grab. It's a generational opportunity. I don't know how else to emphasize how important this is. There is currently, the Chief Justice noted that the parties nominate the candidates. We are nominated by the Michigan Democratic Party. That happened last weekend, and we were both privileged to have that. And the Republicans nominate 2, the Libertarians nominate 2, the Green Party will nominate 1. So it's a crowded ballot with 0 party designation. So our challenge is about 1/3 of voters drop off. They don't even vote the nonpartisan section because they just don't know enough about it. So they just skip it. Another huge percentage guess, and that obviously is distressing. So we don't want them guessing. There's certain names that people guess more frequently, and I think that sounds good and it looks familiar. Fill in that. And that can be probably if people aren't paying attention to values. We'll see a 4-3 decision or a 3-4 decision where it lines up based on values. And so it's important that we get folks to pay attention to this. Most importantly, this is a swing seat. Right now, there are 4 Republican nominated justices, 3 democratically nominated justices. So right now you have the Chief Justice, Justice Bernstein, and Justice Kavanaugh were nominated by the Democratic Party. So we have a huge opportunity. This is the swing seat, and that's why we are really trying to get people to pay attention at a very high level in a very noisy election year. The terms are 8-year terms. That's a huge opportunity if you really want to tackle the hard system change that the Chief Justice is talking about. It's hard to tackle system change anywhere, but for example, in the state house where people have to run every 2 years, it's hard to do long-term systemic change when you're constantly having to run for re-election and take on new issues and really invest for the long term. The court actually has the ability to do that, to look at the long game, and they can be the branch that does that when it comes to the court system itself. And the Chief Justice is doing that. She talked about some of that important work. It's a big reason I was inspired to step forward. I've worked hard in spaces to move the needle on big, complex public entities, and I would love to join her in that work. And so I will stop there, and obviously we are available for questions.
Thank you so much. We have Tom Kelly as well, a representative from our presidential candidate of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris ticket. So please go ahead, Tom.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate you giving some time on the agenda this morning. It's always really important for the campaign to keep our key activists updated on what's happening here in Michigan, one of our 8 battleground states, key to victory on November 3rd. So just sort of a top-line rundown of where we're at. We have been running hard for the past couple of months, despite having no playbook of what we're doing here. I mean, this is a campaign cycle that no one predicted and no one has an idea how it's going to turn out, but more so, how we operate as a campaign is a bit of a trial by fire. So we appreciate everyone's cooperation and patience and whatnot with us, that we're trying to make the best of the situation, which has been sort of a catch-22 for us because, while we're unable to do much in-person voter contact, any canvassing, big rallies, anything like that, the Zoom world has sort of opened us up to a whole group of Democrats that we traditionally wouldn't really be touching across the state. I had a meeting last night or 2 nights ago with the Houghton County Dems, which is a 13-hour drive from Detroit. Unlikely I would have done that in-person trip. So it's been really good. Our focus over the past couple of months has been to highlight Joe's message across the states. I always tell folks on calls that Joe is running for president of all 83 counties in Michigan, at every corner. We want to hear from every voter we can. And what we've been doing is, as the campaign rolls out sort of policy platforms, we're aligning our message and our virtual events to those. So case in point, we had a call a few weeks ago with Senator Stabenow when the campaign rolled out its rural plan, which was great, well attended. We've had events on the women's agenda, on the Lift Every Voice plan, on the Build Back Better plan, on the Made in America plan. So, as the campaign sort of gradually makes the case that we're not just running against Donald Trump because we don't like him, we want to govern as well, these events are aligning to give our activists and voters an idea of what type of president Joe Biden is going to be. So this is really important for especially folks in this call because, as you're talking to neighbors, friends, and family, arming you with the talking points and the positions that Joe Biden stands for is really helpful because, you can always ask people why they're supporting Donald Trump and they give you a blank stare. If they're able to sort of turn that question and you say, well, why are you supporting Joe Biden? It's really important that you know the exact reasons why Joe Biden is a far superior candidate. So these Zoom calls, these virtual events will continue through Election Day. They've been really popular. We encourage everyone on this call to join the public events. They've been great. They're informative. But in addition, we're actually getting the Vice President's making his first sort of in-state trip since March 10th. He'll be in Michigan next Wednesday. Details forthcoming, but it should be a great way to get some local coverage of the Vice President's campaign here in the state. We're also expecting Dr. Biden at some point over the next couple weeks in states. Details forthcoming on that as well. But as things sort of pick up, it's starting to feel like election season. I was out this morning and it was 60 degrees and it's feeling like fall. As things close to Election Day, you're going to see even more and more activity from our campaign. But I want to give one plug before I wrap up to how we're operating our our volunteer engagement and our field plan. This is all being run by the One Campaign of Michigan, which is doing a fantastic job in putting other states to shame. I mean, the amount of voter contact that they've achieved over the past couple of months, since May 1st, they've actually made 7 million calls. They've had around 300,000 conversations. They're running a robust text out program. They're using Wave Michigan. We have daily calls with other states on the campaign, and just in comparison, our One Campaign is light years ahead of everyone else. They have 178 field organizers, and it's something to be really proud of. So if you are looking to get engaged with our campaign, the One Campaign is where you should go. I'm happy to share information if need be, but wanted to give them a plug because as we move closer to Election Day and we figure out if we're doing lit drops, we figure out if we can actually do canvassing, which it's still decisions have yet to be made. The One Campaign is going to be sort of leading that effort for us. So with that, I'm happy to answer a couple questions if we have time. If not, I appreciate everything all of you are doing for the campaign. Let's keep it up. We have 58 days left, so it's time to really kick it in. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom. So our candidate corner format of the candidate corner is really just the candidates give a pitch for anywhere from 3 to 7 minutes. So we really don't have time for Q&A. However, since we only have 3 candidates speak and we have half hour allocated, so we have about 10 minutes left. So that leaves, depending on the type of question, maybe 2 or 3 questions. So you're welcome to send your questions via chat function, and I will read to the candidate. Please write in your chat who you want to ask that question so I can ask that appropriately. We have one question, and I believe this is for Supreme Court candidate from Kevin Karpik. I wonder what you see as the Supreme Court's role in addressing the questions raised in the recent report of the Citizen for Racial Equity in Washtenaw, CREW, which call for more oversight of court decisions in Washtenaw as a way to address the racial disparity they found. Chief Justice or Elizabeth Walsh, you want to take any of this question?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer it. I am very familiar with the CREW report and am grateful that the citizens of Washtenaw decided to put their time and resources into taking a deep dive into the way the criminal justice system is working locally. The lack of data in criminal justice generally is an enormous hurdle to being able to figure out how to make changes. And it's kind of really commendable that the people of Washtenaw County decided it was worth their time and their money to go get the data, so they could have their government take a look at it and do better. Obviously, county criminal justice systems, the people who have the most ability to make significant change are your local prosecutor, the person who is your local prosecutor, and you all certainly have somebody coming in who has every commitment to acting on the data that was uncovered. But it's also the case that the courts have a role to play. And as I said, it's that administrative oversight role where the Michigan Supreme Court has not only the opportunity, but the obligation to make sure that people in our state are receiving equal access to justice. We do have at the Supreme Court, we have a pretty talented statistical research team, and they are looking at that data for me right now. I know that you all have an excellent chief judge and an excellent prosecutor, and so I'm very confident that there will be that the issues uncovered will be addressed. But I'm grateful to have the data for our purposes as well.
Thank you.
And Satish, if I could, I was just going to jump in and just quickly say that one of the things that we are missing so much in the criminal justice system is data. And it's one of the things the pretrial incarceration task force gathered. It's obviously something Washtenaw took the proactive effort to gather. And it's one of the things that's kind of a systemic problem with the whole criminal justice system is missing data to inform decisions. So it's a perfect example of the kind of work that needs to happen.
Jim McCrager is another question he pointed out, and I'm not sure, Elizabeth, if you have seen that, but your name seems to be dropped by ballotpedia.org. Okay, and so you're aware of that. Okay,
yeah,
good,
we're working on it. So, yeah,
I'm glad you are, because that's important.
Yep, yep.
Okay. I guess I was talking on mute, but Krista, go ahead. It's your turn. I unshared it, so
Okay.
you were able to share something.
Sure. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Labor Day weekend, and my fellow UAW and other union members. Happy Labor Day to you as well. I just wanted to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank everybody who came to the fundraiser that my wife and I had in our backyard last week. It was an outdoor, socially distanced, masked up event, and it went really well. We earned raised about $8,500. That money is going toward our voter guide, which is super important and super popular. It will feature on its front page, as a matter of fact, our Chief Justice as well as Elizabeth Welch, because those races get neglected so much. We wanted to place them front and center. And that work is underway right now to get that to the printer and back to us by the end of September, so we can start getting it into the hands of voters who are practicing early voting this year, thanks to our new laws. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about today. There's a lot of rumors going around right now about an internal conversation that was being had by the executive board of the Washtenaw County Democratic Party regarding the endorsement of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, this historic ticket that we are also very excited about in 2020. We have one board member who insists that we are not able to endorse the Biden-Harris campaign. This is obviously a ridiculous statement. However, he's pointing, this person is Leon Sharon. He is pointing to a technicality in our bylaws that say that candidates who receive our endorsement must ask for the endorsement and be members of the MDP. Obviously, you can't be a member of the MDP if you don't live in Michigan. So Kamala Harris lives in California and Joe Biden lives in Delaware. That would make them ineligible for MDP membership. So this was never intended when we wrote this section of the bylaws, but it is an unintended consequence. It's a technicality that we just, it's just ridiculous to consider it as a disqualifying factor of endorsing this historic ticket. So we will be, and I want to make this very clear, we will be endorsing the Biden-Harris ticket. Because Liana will not let this go, we are having to have another endorsement meeting. This endorsement meeting will probably last all of 10 minutes, where we ask the question, will you endorse Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? It is my anticipation that this will be a unanimous vote. This will happen in a couple of weeks. You'll be getting an email notice about this because our bylaws require us to give you 2 weeks notice. Essentially, what Liana was doing is creating an enormous amount of work for me, several hours of checking credentials for people to answer one question: do we endorse the top of the ticket of the Democratic Party? I'm very frustrated by this. There's very little I can do about it. Liana has been openly antagonistic against the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris ticket. I can't explain why that is. You will have to talk to him. In fact, I'm going to, into the chat right now, put Liana's information so that you can contact him directly, because I personally cannot understand why somebody who is on the executive board of a county Democratic Party would be fighting to keep those that ticket from being endorsed by the party. So I just want to make it very clear that that we are going to be endorsing. And I just want to, just in case there's any question about this, I'm just going to share my screen right now. This is how the office in Ypsilanti looks right now. You can see that we are very, very openly and very, very excitedly endorsing the Biden-Harris ticket. So anyway, if there's anybody out there that is hearing this rumor, I really hope that you will share this message that I've given to you today. I've also seen some other scuttlebutt about, accusations that the executive board is not supporting women of color, which I think is just completely perplexing to me. We have 4 women of color on our board. Our vice chair, Mary Hall Sham, who's on this panel today, is on our board. We have endorsed multiple African-American women and Black women for various positions, Ann Arbor School Board, a judicial position. We will aggressively help them win their elections, as we do all of our candidates. So this idea that for some reason the executive board of the Washtenaw County Dems is racist or is not promoting women of color to positions of power, I frankly find it perplexing, because I think all of the evidence it points quite the opposite of that. We work very hard, very intentionally to make sure that we do these, we are promoting these candidates, and I don't understand the arguments. So at any rate, I just wanted to clear the air on this. If you see any folks talking about this, please set them straight, because the Democratic Party in Washtenaw County provides leadership to the rest of the state, and it's very important that that we're providing the right leadership, and I believe that we are. But when we've got people snipping at our heels like this, it's not helpful. It doesn't get anybody elected. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to somebody who knows how to get people elected. That's my favorite Congresswoman in Michigan, Congresswoman Debbie Dingle. You're muted, Debbie. Debbie, you're muted.
Okay, I had to do it differently. Good morning. I hope everybody's good. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for all of your leadership. And I have to tell you all, I had not been to Chris's backyard until last week. It is the most beautiful thing anybody has ever seen. And if you haven't been and he'll let you visit, I highly recommend it. But I also thank Chris for all of his leadership and everything that he's doing. I want to kind of build on what Chris just said and kind of talk about where we are right now in this country, in this race. We have a president that is trying to divide this country with fear and hatred. And it's been going on for 4 years. I remember what this country was like after 9/11, which was, in my lifetime, the worst thing that I had ever seen. But we pulled together as a country. We knew that we were Americans, and it was the worst of times. We were scared, we were fearful, but we all pulled together. And if you look at what's happening in this country, we are finding issue after issue being turned into a wedge issue. So much so that even in our own Democratic Party in Washtenaw County, we're at each other's throats, but you see it everywhere and everything, and it's not okay. And I really want everybody to think about what is happening in our country. That, I mean, I really do believe our democracy is under attack and is at risk. And what happens in November could very well determine what happens to the future of this country. This isn't one of those presidential years where we get up and we say, this is the most important election of your lifetime. And if you're young, you get excited. And if you're old, you've heard it before. This is a loud call for, forget being on rote in your grade school class, your high school class, or college, learning about democracy. This is things you take for granted, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of press, and due process really being at risk on what happens in November. 4 years ago, I warned all of you that Donald Trump could win. Wolf Blitzer pulled out, I didn't know that there was a videotape at CNN at what I was saying at some political meeting. So I didn't remember saying Donald Trump talks at a 4th grade level, so I'm going to talk to you at a 4th grade level. But I did say it 4 years ago. Somebody must have said it, and I'm going to say, I guess I'll say it again because that's already been on CNN. He does talk at a 4th grade level, but I'm going to tell you all, I'm getting scared. My role in life is probably, I've become Debbie Downer just because I always say to people, you can't take things for granted. A month ago, I was maybe feeling a little comfortable. Hey, it's going to be okay. You know, I still got to say, I don't believe the polls, which I don't. I got to tell you, this Labor Day weekend, I'm not feeling good at all. I'm come downriver again, friends. The Trump signs are out more than they were 4 years ago. Well, and one of the, you know, I talked about this at the Unity event that we had after the election. And here's a reality. Since that Unity Sunday gathering, Wisconsin again demonstrated how we have an issue in this country. We saw a Black man shot in the back 7 times in front of his 3 children, and we have yet to understand why that happened. And that same week in Wisconsin, a 17-year-old white man walked down the street with an assault rifle, was given a bottle of water by the police and not stopped, and we later learned he killed 2 people. It's there, it's documented, it's on video. A white man is treated differently than a Black man. That requires a conversation. We have race issues in this country, and what we need is to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations, but in a way that brings people in, and we have real conversations, not with a man who is pouring kerosene on a fire and contributing further to this fear, hatred, and division. And now I'm reading the New York Times, and I got to go back and read it more. The federal government is saying that no one can talk about race somehow in any grant applications, and anybody who thinks there's white privilege is to be automatically denied. Now I got to go figure this out, and we'll try fighting it again next week. But do you all realize, you know, I get people say, I mean, here's our reality right now in Washington. When I finish with you, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to the Ann Arbor's Farmers Market. I'm going to go to Ipsy. I'm out and about. I wear my mask. I keep my distance. Everybody knows this. I can no longer stay in my house, but I'm being careful, and I'm talking to people. And I'm going to go to 2 Black Lives Matter events in the next 2 weekends. But I also talk to law enforcement. People are scared. People are worried about the unemployment's gone. They're worried their jobs are gone. Yes, there were good employment numbers yesterday, but they don't reflect the number of people that don't have a job, the number of people that have been off unemployment. And there were 1 out of 4 people in the state of Michigan doesn't have a job. And now we're getting into situations where parents who have childcare issues and don't have any ability to do childcare, and how they're going to go back to work, or how they're going to, it's a mess. And people are afraid of being evicted. They can't pay their mortgage. We have a food shortage. I mean, people, we have food hunger in our neighborhoods, and people that you don't realize. And seniors are scared to death. They've got to stay careful. They've stayed locked up. They've been isolated. If one more senior says, they've already made a decision, if I get COVID, I'm dead. My life doesn't have any value. I mean, but we've tried. In the House of Representatives, 14 days ago, tomorrow, we passed a HEROES bill to address unemployment, to create a fund for people that needed rent support, mortgage support, and to the landlords themselves, not the big ones, but people buy a house and have an apartment, so that we can do testing, so that and the Senate and the White House refuse to do anything. Nancy is trying to come to the table, and everybody says she refuses to negotiate. Well, you know what? I'm looking at Eon. He knows this. Schools are desperately dealing with what they need to do. State and local governments need support, and the White House and the Senate will not give state and local governments support. They are laying off frontline workers. I've visited schools all week, and I want to tell you something different. I feel like I know how scared people are, and I'm listening to it all day, but when I visited schools, I have to tell you, people were A, glad that I came, B, were happy to see me. And those teachers who are there, and they're teachers that are dealing with pre-existing conditions, and they've got childcare issues, but even those teachers are like, I want to teach from home. How am I going to take care of my kids? They're positive. They've got can-do attitudes. They're like, we got a bad situation, but how do we figure it out? And there was, and you go back and you see the number of meals. I mean, one school is making 70,000 meals a week for just their kids. And those food service workers talked about what it was like when they first came in and how they were scared. And they too were scared they were going to get COVID, but they worried about their kids. And they knew the way that they were going to eat was only if they were there. They were positive. They were like, we need help, but our kids need us. And we're here for us, our kids. And we don't thank the frontline workers enough. But that's happening out there. And so then I see the same circumstances. I'm worried, okay, I'm sorry for those of you had a candidate, and many of you had different candidates. But some of the Bernie people, last week at the 12th, there was words that we should never talk about our candidate, the Democratic candidate. If you're a member of this Democratic Party, we had a nomination process. We followed, we supported it. And our candidate is not a piece of crap. And I will not tolerate anybody saying that again. You shouldn't be a member of our party if you're going to call what the process, and even your candidate is supporting someone that gets used, that gets picked up by somebody. Right now, we're talking about the future of our country. And staying home, you're supporting Donald Trump. You can go, I'm for Medicare for all. There is nobody who's going to work harder than Medicare for all. Just for the record, the Dingle family, my father-in-law is the author of Social Security. He introduced the first Medicare for all bill. And if you look at the history of this country, when we got major programs, we got them at times of stress like this. We've shined a light on where the fractures are. So Joe Biden knows exactly who I am. He was one of John Dingle's dearest friends. He knows that I'm going to fight for Medicare for all, and I'm going to be a giant pain in his ass. But that's okay, because he's going to care about people, and I can be a giant pain in his ass. But we'll respect each other, and we have the same values, and we care about people. So I could talk to you all day, but this is my plea. We've got to come together. We all have the same values. We are scared about what the direction of our country is going. And now when you got a president who it makes fun of and disrespects veterans, I'm not going to go to a cemetery because they're a bunch of losers. A man that, both John Dingle and John McCain had zero respect for. This isn't how we teach our children to respect each other. This isn't how you build a community. This isn't how you build a country or you protect democracy. So please, everybody, we got to come together. And for the next 2 months, we're going to work with the one campaign, and we're going to work with the Biden campaign, and the 12th district is going to beat we're going to beat the 13th and the 14th. We are going to go door to door. We're going to support Donna Lisinski and put our workers over there and win the state house. We need at least 4 seats, but damn it, we're going to deliver 5 seats and we're going to have that house and control it. We can do, we have the people, the energy, the know-how to do it. And where it's safe, we're going to go door to door. We're going to start organizing every weekend. We're going to text and call every night. The 12th district can do it. So please, can we not fight each other? And we need to have those discussions about race. We'll pull people together. I'm looking at Mary and others, and we want to be a leader. I'm not being afraid to have uncomfortable conversations. But let's not put kerosene on fire. Let's bring them together. Let's be the leaders. So, okay, I'm Debbie on a Saturday morning, but I kind of have had it this Labor Day weekend. And to my brothers and sisters in labor, I thank you. I thank you for what you've done for this country, for not this year, but for decades. And all of us need to remember that we have a 40-hour work week. We have holidays and vacations and health care and a safe and secure retirement and we have safe working places, which we got to support the unions on to go in and make sure are even safer now. That all was done by the unions when we came together and stayed together. So thank you for this Saturday morning, and I will not get any more worked up, but I could. Thank you.
So we have Donna, go ahead, please.
Yep, I just wasn't sure if I was supposed to jump in or wait for a transition.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Satish. Yeah. I appreciate having this opportunity to give a state update, a state legislature update. And I echo Congresswoman Dingle's comments. One of my colleagues on the floor, Representative Kyra Harris-Bolden, said the other day, she's out of the Southfield area, you don't fight fire with fire, you fight fire with water. And that's what we need to do in our country right now and in our state legislature and every place where we have influence, is to take the level, to take the inflammatory remarks, to take everything that we're doing and recognizing that we need to calm the country. We need to bring back rational governance. We need to bring back governance that is people-centered and not power-centered. Governance that serves all, not governance that serves the interests of a very small group of people. And so thank you so much, Debbie, for firing us up this morning and getting that ready. And when we know already that we have so much work to do before us. The state legislature returned to the State House this week. And I'm so grateful, again, for the leadership of Congresswoman Dingle here. Every Monday morning now, we start our weeks with a federal, state, local conversation with at least, I think the lowest number I've seen on there is 25 elected officials across the 12th district. We often have up to 40. Who are coming together to say, what are our priorities, what are our issues this week, and how do we work across our levels of government to ensure that our people's needs are met. So in the state, at the State House level this week, we did a few things that are really critical to this moment in time. One, we introduced a nursing home package built on democratic values to ensure that everyone is receiving the care they need in the safety of a facility that prioritizes their needs first and has the ability to have workers who are well paid, commensurate to the risk and to the talents they provide to that nursing home organization to make sure we are staffed at full levels with people who come to work healthy and go home in the evening healthy to their families, which we all know is the challenge of the workforce right now, to be able to do that across many sectors. The second thing that we did was we allocated the rest of the about $300 million in Federal CARES Act funds and put those across the high priority areas that built on work that we had already done. Next, we're heading into the state budget. We are a balanced budget state. And I know this gets a little geeky and people hear the words budgets and kind of zone out. But what that means is we simply are not like the federal government in that we are unable to run a deficit as a state. So we can only move forward with the money that we have. Clearly, revenue, the economy is down. And so as we move into now, our state budget will end at the end of September. October 1st is the beginning of the next budget year. Our goal is that we will not let the state government shut down. We will not end services in this crucial time. And we are deeply engaged in negotiations right now with a nearly $1.5 billion deficit that we are going to have to address going into this fiscal year, to have those tough conversations, again, around values, around what needs to be funded and what we need to do to make sure our state stays healthy in the ways that we have been able to manage during this pandemic under our governor's leadership. Speaking of our governor, we've had a couple new executive orders this week that I want to share with you. The first is that gyms and other facilities, sports can reopen with health and safety guidelines. So if you've been looking to hit the gym, please check out what those safety guidelines are. And if you have the opportunity to enjoy that facility again, please do. Please remember your health and safety guidelines. The next thing, and I want to make this clear, it is not a stay-at-home order, but the governor did extend the state of emergency for the state of Michigan through October 1st. Now, with that comes her ability to continue to issue executive orders that prioritize the health and safety of the citizens of Michigan. I want to be very clear here. It is because our governor has prioritized the health and safety of the residents of Michigan, in direct contrast to my Republican colleagues in the State House and Senate, that we are now one of the fastest recovering economies in the nation because of the work that we've done to stop the spread. So the extension of the state of emergency will allow her to continue to issue executive orders that keep us safe. And so with that, I'm more than, of course, open to any questions or comments. I recognize that as I'm speaking here, one of the difficulties of Zoom is to try and speak, and there's the chat going on right now. One of the greatest things that I believe I can do as a state representative, as an elected official, is to listen to people. The second greatest thing that I can do is stand in place and on firm ground in my values. And part of doing that is taking responsibility for the things that I do and the words that I say and how I conduct myself in public. And so what we have to be clear is that each of us are responsible in our way for those same statements. For being involved in the Washtenaw County Democratic Party, having a platform for you, for myself, for all of us together to share and express our viewpoints is important. And within and amongst each other, we all share the same common values. We also share that we know where we need to get to. And what we share then is, how do we build that path forward together? And when we insult and denigrate each other in ways large and small, it is not helpful. I know it's not helpful to me when what I look to, quite frankly, my Democratic colleagues, my Democratic friends, groups like this, is to fill me with strength, because I know where I have to fight. And where I have to fight is across the aisle. And so I look to you, I look to all of us together to build our collective strength, so that when I go out there, when I'm sitting on the House floor and it is physically shaking, because 10 feet behind me, through simple flap doors, are large men with assault rifles screaming and yelling, I have to know that the reason that I'm sitting there is worth it. I have to know that all of you have my back. I have to know that I'm there fighting for our common values. And when that becomes unclear, when I feel like when any of us feel that we are then the target, that we have lost the ability with each other to have speech and conversations that don't neglect the fact that we are all looking towards the same point in the future, and that show respect to each other in the way we issue those comments, both publicly and privately, we have to take responsibility for those comments. And so I look forward again, and through the next most difficult 60 days, as we work to pick up 5 seats to flip the House, as we work to gain the power we need to implement the goals and objectives that we are all so passionate about, to drawing strength from all of you. We're going to need it. We're going to need it over the next 60 days. I hope to give all of you strength as we work to change this election. And I am very excited for us to move forward to gain the political will and ability to implement the policies and procedures that are so important to all of us. So again, I'm really happy to answer any questions on the stateside update, legislative update. And with that, Satish, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Debbie Dingle and Representative Don Lisinski. Thank you for both of your leadership and appreciate the words that you have spoken this morning. We have about 7 minutes left in this section. The next two folks that are going to be speaking is for POC report. Most important thing we do party. We have Janet Conan, and then after that we have Bob Chen, who will speak about one of the software that we use, Wave software. So go ahead, Janet, please take it over. We have about 3 to 5 minutes for each. Janet, are you on the call, or anybody from Precinct Organizing Committee? We can just move on to Bob. Please go ahead, and if the from POC folks shows up, then they'll take over after you. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Satish. I'll be brief. So thank you very much for giving us a little bit of time to talk about Wave Michigan and also ballot power. Some of you probably haven't heard of ballot power, and I want to kind of start there. It's ballot power is a very simple tool to help voters get through the voting process using Secretary of State's resources. And we spent quite a bit of time simplifying this process to get over a lot of the confusion that voters have about what their options are and putting it in a concise little package. So I'm excited to show you that. And then I'm going to show you a brand new version of Wave Michigan that we call Wave Simply. And this comes out of our work with the Michigan Education Association over the summer, where we contacted some 220,000 voters. They were using the previous version of Wave and to get that 220,000. And so I'm excited to show you this new one, because when we gave it to MEA, their results increased by 350% in the first week that they were using it. And so I'm going to jump right in, because I know that there's a lot of people to speak. So I'm going to share my screen if I can here. And I'm going to show you these two tools. So this is ballot power. This is the easiest way that you'll find to vote in Michigan. A voter might get here because you sent them a text message, or you had it on a t-shirt and it says ballotpower.org, because we're doing that, and you start here. And so I'm going to show you what it looks like for my brother, because he's not an absentee voter yet. So you'll notice that there's not even a first name, last name box, and we do that intentionally because we're trying to be as friendly of a product, as friendly of a voting service as possible. I just found my brother in amongst 6.6 million voter records that we have in our platform. 1 click. He wants to be an absentee voter. 2 clicks. And 3 clicks, he's to the electronic absentee voting application on Michigan Secretary of State. If he wants to, for instance, track his ballot, which a lot of people don't know, but we offer ballot tracking service from the Secretary of State, and we get daily updates. So when he starts the absentee voting process, we'll tell him the status of his ballot here, so that he doesn't have to wonder if his vote gets counted. He just enters his email address and signs up here. There's no membership required, and we'll give updates. And this is where we're building out. So the Secretary of State's adding all kinds of resources, and we're partnering with the ACLU to do this. So this page, this voter information page that shows where where my brother's drop box is going to extend. And it's also going to include information about the satellite offices and even the wait times at the local clerk's offices. So that's ballot power, and we use ballot power. That's what we send to voters using the WAVE system. And so this is going to look somewhat similar to those of you who've used the regular WAVE. Again, this is WAVE Simply. In the background here, we have worked with county parties to preload campaigns. So we decide which voters they want to contact. We load them up inside of WAVE Simply, and we serve one voter at a time to your volunteers. And this is what we know about the first voter I'm getting. He's a moderate. This person voted successfully in the primary. I can see that with the icon here. He's only a 34% likely voter, so we want to get in touch with them. We have these 3 scripts which you can customize, and you give us your scripts, we load them in here, and we're using what's called the WAVE phone. The WAVE phone is it's our phone number, so your volunteers don't have to use their own phones. And I'm sure you're hearing about some trouble with that because there's a lot of companies that are shutting them down, including Apple. So we're providing a phone number, contact information. It's as simple as this. I press send to contact this voter. I go get a new voter. I'm looking at Joyce. She's 97% liberal. She's very much likely to vote, but I'm going to text her anyway. And this is as simple as it works. And so we serve up these voters based on a priority order according to their likelihood to vote and their status in the absentee voting process. So when a voter sends in their ballot application, we instantly put that person in front of a volunteer to say, hurry up and get it back quickly. And we follow them all the way through. And this is the way that it works. We're going for coverage first, knowing that you have a number of voters that you want to cover in your geographies or in your precinct specifically. And then we serve them up. We preference precinct delegates. So this is an important part of what we're doing, is that precinct delegates get access to our platform in a different way. They identify themselves when they sign up. They get the people from their precinct first, and they're able to contact them multiple times and follow each one in their precinct all the way through the voting process. So this is WAVE Simply. I say, I hope that Washtenaw County Democratic Party is going to use WAVE Simply, and this is a service that you get from us for free under your license, under a license with Michigan Democratic Party. And so you can please, let's get back in touch. There's more in here, but I want to be respectful of the time. And so I'm happy to follow up and give anybody more details that would like it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. I guess I'm not sure if we have POC, but it's 10:31. Mary, would you like to start our main program? Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna take it over, and I'm gonna share real quick my screen so that I put the agenda and then the panelist bio.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Take it over, Mary.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this Labor Day weekend. This is going to be a weekend that we are going to energize, come together, and win this election for Democrats. We have an excellent program for you this morning. It is very, let's say, pertinent to the times. It also honors our organized labor movement. And the person that is our moderator for the presentation this morning is a professor at the University of Michigan, Dr. Ian Robinson. He is a longtime activist in the Washtenaw County area. He has been in the United States for approximately 25 years, and he comes to us from our friend to the north, Canada. What we are going to talk about is relevant to the situation. We're still asking, why are we having the conflicts with African American, and the police. And what can we as a community do about that? What can we as a union, and what does the union, organized labor, can they contribute to this community conversation? And so with this, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Robinson for this morning's program. Welcome, Dr. Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mary. And thank you to the Washtenaw County Democratic Party for offering Huron Valley Area Labor Federation, on behalf of workers in our area and our region, the space to put together an event of our choosing in honor of workers for Labor Day. Thanks also for helping to organize this, Mary, and also Satish for all of the logistical work you've been doing to make this happen. I really appreciate it. Just for anyone who may not know, Huron Valley Area Labor Federation is a federation of about 50 local unions whose members live and or work in 4 counties, our own here in Washtenaw, but also Livingston, Jackson, and Hillsdale. Our affiliates represent about 20,000 union members. We fight for those members, of course, but we also fight for working people more broadly, whether or not they're fortunate enough to be in unions. And because we fight for working people, we fight for economic and social justice. That's why we're backing a millage for affordable housing in the city of Ann Arbor this fall. That's why we've worked with the Ann Arbor City Council, with the Washtenaw County Commissioners, and with Ann Arbor School Board trustees to adopt responsible contracting language that will help to set a floor and standards in our local construction sector, a floor that's been eroded by Republican state legislators who took away prevailing wage legislation that used to operate in our state. We're now expanding those efforts to Jackson and Saline. It's why we recently passed a resolution urging our allies in all of those local governments and the state of Michigan as well to join the Sweat-Free Purchasing Consortium as a strategy to end sweatshop labor in apparel production worldwide. It's also why we chose to focus today on labor, policing, and race for this roundtable. The 2 most fundamental sources of economic and social injustice in our country are the extreme and growing wealth inequality that's corrupting our political system, and the deeply embedded institutional racism that has been with us since before the beginnings of this country. Institutional racism ensures that some working people will be treated worse than others in every way imaginable. And that's the focus of the racial justice fight, of which we're a part. But racism also divides working people, weakening us politically so that we're far less effective in fighting class injustice than we would otherwise be. And so for both of these reasons, the labor movement can't really fulfill its economic and social justice mission unless we fight racism, institutional racism in particular, head on. And at this moment in our history, there's no aspect of institutional racism that is more high profile, more deadly to Black and brown people, and more destructive to the unity of working people than the police shooting and killing of unarmed people of color. Every week it seems it's a new case. My wife is Black, and my twin daughters who identify as Black and are seen that way by the world live in Minneapolis and in the Washington, D.C. area. Because of who they are and where they live, police murders have penetrated deeply into their lives and so into the life of my family. That's a very personal connection that I feel. But a lot of white people get this, whether or not they have this particular kind of connection, as shown by who's turning out for the demonstrations. The demonstrations that Trump, of course, is portraying, peaceful mass demonstrations organized by communities in which police violence has taken lives, as he portrays them as the ravages of a mob of others and left-wing crazies, another kind of othering, I suppose. He then mobilizes federal forces and armed white vigilantes to restore, quote, law and order, unquote. Racism has always been extremely dangerous for people of color, but it's becoming increasingly obvious just how dangerous it is to everyone's civil rights and to democracy itself, already under profound assault by the Koch brothers and their ilk. So the labor movement, I think, has a specific responsibility in the fight against police violence because 3/4 of police in this country belong to unions. About 600,000 of the 800,000 police in this country. Of those, probably only 20% or so are actually affiliated with the AFL-CIO or the state version of that or the local version. There don't happen to be any police unions that are directly affiliated with Huron Valley Area Labor Federation. But a number of the major affiliates of the AFL-CIO, Absentee, Teamsters, and also non-affiliates such as Service Employees International Union, SEIU, have branches or locals, parts of them that represent police. So the police are involved in complex and unusual, distinctive from pretty much any other kind of worker in the labor movement. But the labor movement most certainly has responsibility for what's going on in the world of policing, given this union connection, quite aside from the way in which all this connects to our larger mission. So it's on us, I would say, to do what we can to ensure that police unions, whether or not they're directly affiliated with our federations and our international unions, that they're part of the solution to institutionalized racism and its manifestations in police violence rather than part of the problem. And so that's why we picked this topic. The next question became how to have an honest and useful public conversation about a topic so fraught with emotion and rhetorical extremism. My thinking was that we needed to assemble people who could speak from detailed experience and a number of different vantage points, but share a commitment to changing police culture and the practice insofar as they're shaped by racism. With those criteria in mind, Mary and I assembled a roundtable that you're going to hear from today. I'm going to call on each of our participants to give a little bit of an introduction of who they are in the order that I'm going to state in a second. 3 minutes or so, I think, would be about right. I think I'd like to start, and I'll turn it over in just a moment, but I'll just give the order so people can prepare with County Sheriff Jerry Clayton, and then we'll go to Ann Arbor City Chief of Police Michael Cox, and then we'll go to Independent Community Police Oversight Commission Chair Lisa Jackson, and then to my colleague from the Residential College at the University of Michigan, Leo member and activist and director of the Prison Creative Arts Project, Nora Krenitsky. So Jerry, could you briefly introduce yourself? Oh, Jerry might not be there. He might have to join late, right? Let's proceed on down. We'll circle back to Jerry. I think there was
Can you hear me?
He's there.
Oh, good. There you are.
Should be able to see. I'm sorry, I was still on mute. So good morning. Thanks to the Washtenaw County Democratic Party for having me and for convening this discussion. Obviously a relevant discussion, an important discussion, not just today, but it's actually been a discussion, an experience we've had for 400 years as African Americans. I appreciate people coming together and recognizing this situation. It's not new to us that are African American. You said to tell me a little bit about myself. Well, you can see the fact that I am African American, been that way for 55 years. And I think it's important to understand that. And I tell this to folks. I was Black male in this country, navigating the challenges of systemic racism before I was elected, since I've been elected. And for those that think you get to a certain position and that doesn't happen anymore, I will argue that sometimes it happens more. And I will be Black when I'm done with being the sheriff. And that's important to me. And it's important for me to say that because that has shaped how I've tried to lead this organization for the last 12 years. It has shaped how I've tried to conduct myself and what has been priorities for me for the last almost 33 years since I've been in this profession. I'll just say this. I believe the policing profession has a noble objective. The objective is to be servants and to help protect. I believe most of the people in the profession are noble. But the key word here is they're people. We hire human beings and bring them into organizations, and human beings, all of us are flawed. We have our own biases, some implicit, some explicit, and I think it interferes with what we do. So when we have this conversation, I want us to recognize that for us to move in the direction that we want to move, we have to recognize the fact that all of us have to commit, we have to be vigilant, and we have to some degree be patient, but in another degree, not be patient. We've been patient long enough. It's been 400 years. So I appreciate once again you having me, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Could we go to Chief of Police Michael Cox?
Sure. Thank you very much. Well, similar to Sheriff Clayton, I too am African American, and certainly, share a lot of the things that he just talked about. Is certainly about career and our goals of being in this field. I started my career over 31 years ago in the city of Boston for 30 years there, and so I bring a little something different in the sense that I started off wanting to help, and I still do want to help, and being a police officer, I worked through the ranks, but I was also a victim of a civil rights, abuse case that was pretty sensationalized and made public. And unlike probably what people expected, I didn't leave the police department. I stayed in the police department, and then I dedicated, the remainder of my career of basically educating myself and professionalizing myself to the point where I could impact the police department from the inside out. And I've spent the majority of my career doing that in multiple sections in the Boston Police Department. And culminated by on the 30th anniversary, I ultimately retired from Boston and came here to Ann Arbor to be a chief, which is my first chief's job, hoping to, again, continue to do and to add to policing in multiple ways to help the public, particularly around these kind of issues. So it's ironic that, in this short time that I've been here, all of these very unfortunate things have come to bear, because it's almost quite personal to me. And so I welcome the opportunity to have this discussion, and I love the fact that there is a discussion, because that's something that concerns me about where we're going forward, because it doesn't seem to be very much of that going on. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Now from Commission Chair Lisa Jackson.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Lisa Jackson, and I'm the chair of Ann Arbor's Independent Community Police Oversight Commission. It's a relatively new commission, and I think we spend half of our time just trying to let people know we exist. I came to police oversight after having done work for Ozone House for about 12 years and working with homeless and at-risk kids in Washtenaw County. And one of the things I saw was that they had quite unfortunate encounters with police. And in some of those cases, we were actually doing a project together, and they were doing what's called a photo voice story. So you take pictures of a day in your life. And we were working with some kids in Ypsilanti. We were up on top of Eastern's Business School, where we had permission to be. And police came up and started, to the perception of the kids and mine as well, sort of harassing the kids. And I kind of said, hey, we have permission to be here, what's going on? And the kids were photographing this kind of interaction with the police. And they kind of said to me, hey, this is kind of normal, because I was quite annoyed. And the kids were like, hey, this is a normal part of our thing. And so we were able to have some conversations with Ypsilanti police about the fact that homeless kids often are perceived as being more likely to commit a crime, but are actually more vulnerable to crime. And we didn't make much headway in having those conversations with Ann Arbor police. Certainly you guys can tell maybe you can't tell, but I identify as African American as well. And I have certainly had encounters with the police, and many of those had to do with being a woman, and many of those involved sexual harassment. I've been pulled over and asked out on dates, and if I refused that, I was given a ticket. That happened in Ann Arbor. I got pulled over as a young driver in Detroit on Valentine's Day because, hey, baby, you should be my Valentine. And those kinds of things leave a lasting impression on you, and feeling vulnerable to the police and understanding the power that they have, and that feeling of powerlessness you have in that moment. And certainly that has stayed with me. And so as I left the board of directors at Ozone House, I thought about sort of expanding, thinking about police. And as Ann Arbor was forming a police oversight commission, I have been getting trained for the last 2 years by the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement Board, and I'm now a certified oversight professional. And so I interact with oversight professionals at all kinds of oversight agencies across the country, and have learned an awful lot. There are many different kinds of oversight, and what we have here in Ann Arbor is called review. We don't have as much teeth as we would like, but we do use the power that we have. And one of the powers that we have is making people aware of what's going on, what they can do, and how we can change. So I'm really happy. One of the ways in which we can impact policing is certainly by impacting police unions. And one of the best ways to impact police unions is when their contracts are up for negotiation. We found ourselves in that situation this year. One of the problems with being new is that even city council forgets we exist. So they started negotiating police contract without talking to us about it. And it was us kind of saying, what in the world, why are we not included in this conversation? And so we were kind of brought in at the last minute, but still have been able to make some substantive suggestions, we'll see how that goes, to the police union contract. And so I'm really happy to be here. Thank you all for including me. Thinking about police unions is something that I do on a daily basis. Thinking about the Ann Arbor Police Officer Association is something I do on a daily basis. I'm also a union member. I'm an MEA member, I'm an NEA member, and the first union I ever joined was the GEO at Michigan. And I was at Michigan, I was a lecturer when we went on strike, as I'm dating myself, but as Leo was being formed. And so am a non-picket line crossing hardcore union member myself. And so I feel like having those perspectives is useful when I think about the way that police unions work, because they are a different animal. But all I have to say, thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to engage in the conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. It's really great that you could be with us. Nora.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nora Kranitsky, and I am a lecturer in the residential college at U of M, and also the director of the Prison Creative Arts Project, which does creative arts programming in Michigan correctional facilities. I come to this topic as a historian. My training is in urban history and history of criminal justice and policing. I also, as you can imagine from my work with the Prison Creative Arts Project, work very closely with communities and populations who are directly impacted by the carceral system. I'm also a very proud LEO member. GEO was also the first union that I was a member of as I did my graduate work at U of M. And I think Lisa summed it up well. I'm a non-picket crossing hardcore labor supporter. So it's really it's wonderful to have this conversation. I'm also a relatively new member of the University of Michigan Police Department Oversight Committee as of earlier this summer. And similarly to how Lisa was describing the Independent Police Oversight Committee's purview, as of now, the U of M the U of M Oversight Committee has the ability to review grievances or complaints, but we're currently pursuing some changes to our procedures that would allow the committee to make more proactive recommendations when it comes to policy and police community relations. We think that the university will be, or we hope that the university will be amenable to those changes. So that I think will be a positive development in that committee. So, yeah.
All right, thank you, Nora. I'm just going to say a little bit about the structure of where we're going from here, and then we'll just get rolling. So Nora, there's really three parts remaining here. One is that Nora is going to draw on her historical expertise to give us a 10-minute history of what, 10 minutes is not a lot, but of what she thinks are the most important salient points for this discussion we're going to have of police, the evolution of policing, race, and labor in this country. And then we're going to turn to the main focus of this today, which is a discussion among the four, really, Jerry, Michael, Lisa, and Nora, organized around three questions, which I'll get to when we get there. I'll lay those out. I'm going to be facilitating it. I'll probably intervene with sharpening questions if that seems useful at certain points, but The four others are really the ones who know different aspects of this system far better than I do. So I'm going to be largely playing that facilitating role. Once we've had that discussion, we're going to reserve the last 20 minutes, and Mary's going to make sure that we, certainly no less than 15 minutes. Mary's going to make sure that at that point, we take Q&A, again, using the chat function, and Mary will sort through them and pick the ones that are most relevant to what we've been talking about, connect best, and ask them to the members of the roundtable. So that's the overall plan for the remainder, and I'm now going to turn it over to Nora.
Great, thanks, Ian. And as Ian said, I will try and give a brief and coherent history or some historical context in 10 minutes. I'll try and keep it short because I know we're making up a little bit of time also. Police departments, as we know them, or modern police departments that are part of municipal governance, have their origins in the mid to late 19th century. There are some regional differences among the historical origins of police departments. In southern states, they are closely tied to slave patrols that would, police slavery, control slave labor in southern states. In northern cities, and particularly large industrial cities like Chicago and New York, they were very closely tied to capital and business interests. And so formalized and sort of brought into municipal governance as a way to control labor strife and conflicts, among the most famous of those incidents being the Haymarket Affair in Chicago in 1896, a violent confrontation between police and workers. Although, like I said, there are regional differences and absolutely racial differences in this history, there is a common thread of relationship between modern policing and labor control or capital. This starts to change a bit in the 1930s during the New Deal. So with the passage of the National Labor Relations Act in 1935, this legalizes union activity throughout the country. And part of why this is really important with regard to policing is it really moves sort of the purview of oversight and conflict from these local municipalities to the federal government and larger government organizations. So this is really an important shift in terms of the political landscape of labor and policing. But it's important to underline too that this shift in unionization and oversight doesn't stop conflict between police departments and working people. It's an important shift though in understanding sort of which state actors had authority to kind of step into conflicts over labor. I'll just mention too, by the mid 20th century, in the late 50s and early 60s, is when we see the rise of public sector unions and collective bargaining by municipal employees. And this starts first at the state level, first in New York, and then spreads to other states in the late 50s, and then is instituted at the federal level in 1962. And so this is a moment where we see the proliferation of many different kinds of municipal sector unions, as well as police unions. So one other historical process I want to mention that's happening kind of at the same time as these changes with regard to labor law and public sector unions is the Great Migration of African Americans from the rural South to cities in the North, but also cities in the South. This is a really important part of migration that sometimes gets overlooked. We often focus on the migration of African Americans from South to North, but it's actually even more significant numbers of Black people are migrating from the rural South to the urban South. So part of why I mention this is even though we're seeing these changes in labor laws that start to move police and labor conflicts kind of out of the spotlight, there are these new kinds of social tensions, racial boundaries that are increasingly adjudicated by police or sites of conflict between police and working people, namely conflicts over neighborhood boundaries, over access to resources, And we see that in cities throughout the country, even though I think often in our popular narratives, we focus on how that's happening in northern cities, again, like Chicago and Detroit. So with that sort of mid-century change to the rise of public sector unions, the rise of African-American populations in cities, we also start to see some important or some connections between white ethnic and white conservative political power and police unions in major cities. You know, one of the more notorious examples of this is the mayoral administration of Frank Rizzo in Philadelphia, who fairly famously was, you know, aligned with the police union there, and had, I think even now, rather shocking white supremacist rhetoric in his mayoral campaign. Another thing I'll mention too is that although, you know, by the 1960s we see police unions legalized, they still built on older organizations, fraternal organizations that had been present since the early 20th century to support the interests of police members. So those organizations would do things like raise money for a person's you know, retirement or some similar actions. So although the labor laws only allow public sector unions by the late 20th century, there are these longer roots of these kinds of organizations. With that kind of alignment with some police unions with kind of, you know, white law and order politics or conservative politics in the 60s and 70s, we see more and more policing of what I would call kind of radical or leftist organizing in cities, but also all over the country. So there's a parallel to draw here between the way that earlier police departments were policing labor conflict and the way in the later 20th century they would come to police Black and radical organizing. So for instance, in Detroit in the 1960s and 70s, when you take a look at the map of where arrests and also complaints were being, you know, logged or put forth, a lot of it was happening among the neighborhoods where Black radical organizing was happening. And so there's a really, certainly a correlation there to be drawn about where kind of police, what was being policed, right? At least in that city, in those neighborhoods, it was Black organizing. One thing I'll mention that is definitely significant, especially in major cities with big police departments, is we also start to see in these decades the formation of alternative unions or organizations for African-American officers. And often those officers were, they were mistreated sometimes by their own departments that in similar ways that citizens were. So there's a police union in Philadelphia, and probably or I would say certainly one of the largest, maybe the most famous organization like this is the African American Police League in Chicago. So moving a little bit more into the present, you know, there's certainly, and I know I'll sort of start to wrap it up now, because we'll have plenty to say about police unions and violence, but there's certainly, you know, a complicated history between police unions and attempts to protect or prevent their members from being disciplined for really any infractions, but also for incidents of violence. You know, there have been some studies showing a correlation between collective bargaining agreements and police lethality. It's important there too to note that this is a correlation, not necessarily causation, or there isn't evidence to show that it's a causative relationship. But I mean, I think for those of us who are active in the labor movement, it's important to kind of think through solidarity and how we protect our memberships, but also then in the instance of police unions, how that might extend to harms that are visited upon communities that are being that are being policed. So just to sort of wrap up and highlight a couple of key takeaways, there's obviously a very complex history between police unions and police departments with regard to race, to classist violence, to law and order politics. And one thing that I think certainly comes through in this history and just in the history of policing more generally, that I've found in my own work is that time and again, kind of pointing out the problems is not sufficient. I mean, and we do need to continue to point out the problems, but sort of making this knowledge sort of seen, more visible, is not enough. And one phrase that really kind of sticks with me when in this field is you can't police your way out of the problem. And this is true when we think about social inequality, when we think about gendered violence, when we think about all different kinds of problems. And I think historically it's been true for police themselves too, when we think about police practices. So I'll leave it there. I think I went on 11 minutes, but keep it there and turn it back over to Ian for our roundtable.
Thanks, Nora. I do want to mention one thing that I should have mentioned at the, before we started, and that is that we also did invite the president of the Ann Arbor Police Union local to join us. And initially he agreed to join, but then he later decided not to. I think it would have been good to have his voice here. It would have been a different voice. It might have been at odds with some of what we have to say because the larger union that he is part of has endorsed Trump, and their endorsement of Trump was in a very strong Trumpian rhetoric as well. So I think it would have been a discordant voice in some ways from the people that are at the table here now, but it would have been a voice that we should have heard, but that is not going to happen. So, so we're running a little bit behind schedule, mainly my fault, but I wanted you to hear introductions from people themselves. I didn't want to introduce people, so that took a little time. We hadn't been scheduled originally. I think I might combine the first two questions, and they kind of flow one into the other. The first question that we had originally come up with was, in cities like Minneapolis and Chicago, what needs to change to protect people of color from unjustified police violence? And then question two was going to be the same question for Washtenaw County and the city of Ann Arbor in particular. So we can just work those two questions together. If you want to speak to Minneapolis or Chicago or Boston, because Michael Cox comes from Boston and knows that system extremely well, please feel free to. But if you don't have much to say about those bigger cities, we can go straight to our own, local situation. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over. I don't have a particular order with just four of you. I think you can just keep an eye on each other's body language and take turns. And I'll try to make sure everyone gets heard if there's any danger of that not happening, but I trust that it will happen. So go ahead, have at it, please.
Well, I'll start off then, certainly talking about, and I'll speak more from maybe my East Coast perspective. I'm not in Chicago, not in Milwaukee. It's hard to talk about other agencies because you don't know their policies, you don't know their training regimen. But the fact is, in my experience, creating a culture where you value human life, where you value, everyone who you serve, it's talked about a lot, but it sometimes it's not reinforced appropriately or enough, particularly in larger police departments. The reality is they do a fair amount of training with officers at one end, and then usually the upper command staff usually does a lot of development themselves on the other. And in between there's a bunch of supervisors and middle management that don't necessarily have the professionalism, the mentorship to deal with the officers on a daily basis, to reinforce all the training that we give them, to reinforce the why behind what we do, to reinforce all the aspects that individuals need to understand. When you give a policy, the why behind it, they need to see that their bosses believe in the policy. They need to hear from their bosses that, hey, we're doing this because it's the right thing to do. And if you don't do that, it's very difficult to change culture. because, you know, we can create all the policies in the world, but if the officers don't understand it, they don't believe it, and it's not reinforced in between those gaps, between them and the highest levels, the output is what you might see what's going on today. And I think that that's very difficult to change because, you know, there's a lot being done, but the reality is there's a economic factor and what that means. And professionalizing police is so important because we are a profession, you know, where we need to probably do more to act like we're a profession, whether it's through accreditation, whether it's through follow-up, whether it's through making sure everyone within the chain is developed, just like any other profession out there. You look at the sporting world, and the fact is these sport teams have players that go out there and they can take them from almost any walk of life, and they have them watch videotape of their practices. They have them grade themselves. They have them, you know, fully understand everything that they need to do before they walk out on that field. I don't necessarily know if we do that, and we certainly don't have the funds to do that currently. And so if you want to really change behavior, it's certainly in a rapid way, you really need to invest heavily into that kind of training and professionalizing, in my opinion. I could go on, but I was just going to let other people talk. I know we're short.
And I'm not going to pick who's next, so go
I'll
ahead.
jump in.
Okay.
So I am a psychologist. I'm a researcher, actually not a clinician. And so I love data, and I'm going to agree with an earlier statement that data on police behavior are lacking. I'm also newly appointed by the governor to the Michigan Commission on Law Enforcement Standards. And so part of what that commission does is think about training and dictate what licensing exams look like, and then thus that feeds into what curricula look like across the state for training police officers. So that's something I'm very interested in. And I also neglected to say that I used to work at what was called the Maxey Training Center. And that had kids from 12 to 21 who were incarcerated, who were convicted of felony convictions. And I worked with those kids for a long time. Having said that, I think it's really important to change police culture, right? But just that takes a super long time. And I don't think people feel like we have that much time because we've spent too much time already not changing police culture, right? So from a psychological point of view, I think what has to happen is some radical, not necessarily incremental, how about radical and incremental, sort of attention to police behavior. And that means, so lots of police officers who do egregious things that we see, and this is probably true of anyone doing egregious things in their profession, it's not the first time they've done that. They don't go from 0 to 100, right? They've done some other things along the way that, for whatever reason, led them to believe that those behaviors were fine. And so what I think we have to do, like right now, is set a hard line and say that police discipline is a thing, and it's a consistent thing. And I know in America, we'd like to do 3 strikes and you're out, and your first DUI, it's not that bad. Your second one, though, that's really bad. And I'm just going to tell you from a psychological point of view, and you can see this in other countries, punishment needs to be sufficiently severe the first time around to decrease the chances of a second one. So we don't need to move up and allow people to habituate, if you will, to punishment. You need to punish them the first time, and you need to do it such that it's sufficient, such that they don't want to do that again. So then when we talk about whether police can police themselves, so far we haven't seen that, right? Could they? Maybe, but do we see that? No. And so I love evidence-based stuff, and we just don't have any evidence that that happens much, right? And so then you think about civilian oversight. And I know one of the common refrains is, well, civilians don't understand us. They haven't walked a mile in our shoes. You can't understand what we do. We can, though, understand the expectations of what the community wants from police. And so I think actually having civilians look at that is a really important part of thinking about. But if the role of police is indeed to serve the community, what does the community want to see, and how do they want the police to behave in your particular community, right? So I think oversight then, particularly now, because we have hundreds of years of evidence of police not policing themselves very effectively, as civilian oversight professionals, we can say, hey, we see that there are these behaviors, some of which are more egregious than others. So we were formed because of the killing of Oral Rosser in 2014, 2014, so 5 years. I always think it's 5 years ago, but it was November. That's pretty egregious. And because that hadn't happened in Ann Arbor, there hadn't been an officer involved shooting in a long time. I think that contributed to the outrage that people felt. Were there other kinds of incremental things before that? Absolutely. And so we're drawn to this killing of a person who did not need to die. I think we can safely say that she did not have to be killed. But we also need to be looking at other things as well. And we need to be looking at those things. We need to be disciplining those things. And for us right now, police oversight has the ability to say, look at this thing, look at that thing, look at the other thing. And what are we going to do about that? And maybe that means right now, just a nudge. But I think we do shine the light on that. And the public is more aware. And so now the community in Ann Arbor is thinking about the police union contract. And they weren't thinking about that before. And so we feel like that's a win. We have demanded to City Council, there's no way our interests should be ignored in this. We need a voice, we need a seat at the table, and now we talk to the negotiating team. We should have done that when they first set their goals for the contract, but better late than never, right? And so I think we need to think about the teeth of oversight. And clearly we were formed based on the work of a task force that was convened by the Human Rights Commission here. And I gave a link to the Police Officers Union letter to about endorsing Donald Trump, right, where they referred to peaceful protesters as felonious people committing felonies. But the Police Officers Union, the Ann Arbor Police Officers Union, wrote a pretty strong letter, I'll post the link in a second, about the formation of civilian oversight, and said that it was based on no evidence, there was no need for it, and they very strongly suggested that we were useless and should not be formed. And so there is this kind of resistance to having oversight. City Council is nervous about oversight too. Are we going to embarrass them? Are we going to say things? And so the support that we get is kind of conditional on, but just don't say anything too embarrassing, right? And so we have to fight lots of different kinds of things. Nora, you probably have some of that as well. And so we have to just kind of keep our eyes forward and think about, okay, what do we want here? And right now we're really focused on educating the public about what's going on and all the millions of things that play into police behavior, right? We have to think about affordable housing. Why don't the police live in this community? Because they can't afford to. Why are there so few police of color in Ann Arbor? Some people argue that you should, if Ann Arbor's 10% African-American, 5% Latino, you should have 5% Latino, 10% African-American police officers. Other people argue that you should base those percentages on who gets policed. In Ann Arbor, there may be some differences in who gets policed. And so that might drive then how you think about the diversity of your police force. So I think there are like tons and tons of things to think about. We feel like we're drinking out of the fire hydrant all the time. And so we have our hands in lots of different things, and we are thinking about lots of things. From me at the state level, thinking about training, to us going into the police to budget, and now being asked by the mayor to do that and say, hey, can we move funds around? Can we defund the police in some way by moving some of those funds somewhere else? What is the ability to do that? That was not part of our mission. We were formed to have some influence on police policy, but we weren't invited into the budget. Now in June, the mayor says, well, hey, dive into their budget. Think about that, because people want to defund the police. And so now that's part of our responsibility as well. So there are a lot of things we do, but and there are a lot of things we can do, but I think part of it is making the public aware, and then thinking about, okay, these things we've tried from the police haven't worked, and we need to stop kind of do the things we've done 100 times before, and we need to think out of the box and maybe just use some science to think about how to affect some actual change and not take another 400 years to try to move the needle an inch. Go, Jerry.
I imagine that's going to provoke some response, Jerry.
No, so I don't disagree with a lot of what I heard. I think we start off with, I'll go back to what the chief said and what Dr. Jackson said in terms of culture. So we can regulate behavior to some degree and influence it with the law and with policy and some prescriptive procedures, but you can't change behavior unless you delve into the basic assumptions and beliefs that people have. and the values that they have. And that's the makeup of organizational culture. And take it from someone who's been trying to change organizational culture in our institution for 12 years, it was probably around year 5 or 6 where I started to see a fundamental shift. I started to hear the language that we were looking for. I started to see consistent behaviors. And even within that 12 years, and I'm talking about thoughtful, dedicated, continuous, hard work, focused on changing organizational culture, you're still going to have some staff that operate outside of what you prescribe. So I'm always concerned when people make generalities about all the police. Well, it's not all the police. It's enough of them that should cause us concern. And because the role that police play, we should hold all police to a certain level. But let's recognize when the work is actually being done right. So if you want to have it done right, then recognize when it's right. And then study when it's right. And then study what went into making it right. And then try to replicate that. I'm always concerned when people say, well, all of this is wrong and we got to throw it all out and start all over. Well, that's not true, because there are instances where it's done right. And I'll give you an example. And I'll tie back into what the chief was talking about in terms of policy. So here's a merging of culture and policy. So go to our website, go to our subject control use of force website. And we start with a very strong preamble that makes it very, very clear the role that subject control and use of force plays. And the fact that we don't just value the sanctity of police life, we value the sanctity of everybody's life. And that we shouldn't get called to a mental health call and somebody die as a result of it. So you start to lay that out. You start to try to merge policy and culture together, and that's where you start to see some change. I want to add a couple more things too. It's not just the sanctions. So I'm right there with Dr. Jackson in terms of the sanctions, and we're going to get to this labor conversation in a minute. I can't wait for, because that influences how sanctions and discipline is put in place. And I also said to you the other day, Ian, I want to make sure we don't let elected officials off the hook. In a municipal government, it's not the chief that negotiates the contract. It's the elected officials negotiate the contract. So we got to have that conversation. But let me pivot really quick backwards. It's not just who you sanction, it's who you hire and the criteria for who you hire. It's also who you promote and what you reward. It's all of those things on a continual basis that reinforces, here's what we expect from you, here's what we don't want from you. And I'm all for holding people accountable, but I also know I'm hiring human beings. And there are times where there's a situation that is not desirable that was just an error because you're a human being. And in our place, if I'm not going to fire you, I might hold you accountable, but now I'm going to work with you really, really hard to make sure that doesn't happen again and that you act in the way that we want you to act. So I think there's a lot of that stuff that comes into play. And if you'll indulge me for 60 more seconds, I want to say this because I don't want this to get away. It's not lost on me that since the inception of organized policing, it's been led predominantly by white males, right? So now, just in the last decade, maybe decade and a half, you're starting to see people of color assume positions of leadership. Now, we just said it takes years, maybe sometimes decades, especially in big departments, for organizations, for culture to change. So now all of a sudden, we want to throw all this out. Now that you start to have, especially in progressive communities, African-American leadership, we want to run them out. So we don't give them a chance to do some of the stuff we want to do. We want to defund, throw away, get rid of the chief. You just lost who I believe is a great chief in Seattle, who's done phenomenal things, African-American female. So for all these years, you have white males leading stuff. Now you start to have African-Americans and other people of color in positions of leadership. We want to throw everything away. I don't think it's right, because I'm all for immediate change, but let's understand the human dynamic, and culture and organizational culture takes time. And as long as we're progressing in the right direction, then those people that you hired, that you brought in the recent time, how come you're not giving them an opportunity to work collaboratively with the community to achieve the outcomes that we want to achieve? So I know I put a lot of stuff in there because I might not talk again.
Nora hasn't been heard from yet. So do you want to jump in, Nora? Or
yeah, although, Michael, did you want to jump in with a comment there? Okay. Yeah, thank you all for your comments. I think that one thing that was on my mind with this question kind of picks up on what Sheriff Clayton has been saying about cultural change and really what that takes, and thinking about our first question, kind of looking to the examples of Minneapolis and Chicago, one thing that came to mind for me is that what I think can be a really instructive example from the city of Chicago, and that is the work of the broad coalition of organizers and activists who secured the 2015 Chicago Police Department reparations ordinance. And part of why I bring this up is, and I'll say more about kind of the details in a moment, but to me, this is a really important example to look to because it's not only about addressing past harms by police, but also about healing communities that have been harmed and addressing their trauma and providing resources going forward. We've had some conversation this morning about, individual incidents or, disciplining particular officers. But to actually improve relations and change culture, there needs to be a more holistic engagement and provision of resources to communities that have historically suffered harms from police departments. So the example of Chicago, the reparations ordinance passed in 2015 provided a range of resources and restorative measures to individuals and their families who had been victims of police torture during the 1970s and 80s. So this was more than 120 people, most of them African-American men who were systematically tortured. Many of them eventually provided coerced confessions. Many were incarcerated. And activists in Chicago truly worked for decades to secure justice and recognition for the harms that had occurred. And that reparations ordinance passed by the Chicago City Council in May 2015 provided a wide range of ways to address the harms that had been visited, including a formal apology from the mayor and the city council, a permanent public monument, inclusion of the history of police torture in Chicago in the city's public school curriculum, a $5.5 million reparations fund for individuals or their families, as well as other trauma and counseling services, which are ongoing, that families and communities who are connected to this ongoing incident have access to. And part of why I bring that up is I think it really just recognizes the limitations or the fact that kind of the individualized nature of oversight that we currently have is really not enough for communities to heal and move forward. And that's part of what I think I'm hearing too with Sheriff Clayton's comments, that, it's not quite enough to remove one individual if you're not also working towards cultural change. And I think that cultural change has to be within departments, but also with how we work with communities who have suffered traumas, who are carrying those traumas with them. It's no wonder to me that a community who has a long history of experiencing police violence would not trust an officer. I don't think that that's like puzzling to anyone on this panel, but thinking about how to kind of build that trust or change that relationship in a more holistic way. I do think there are examples we can look to. And I can say more to, well, I'll just say it now. In terms of Washtenaw County and Ann Arbor, I think a big part of grappling with this will be really grappling seriously with what I think of as like Washtenaw County exceptionalism, right? That we are a liberal place, the most highly educated city. How could this, I see Sheriff Clayton laughing, or it looks like he's laughing. It'll be really necessary to seriously grapple with that and think about how that kind of narrative that I think is very widely held in our own communities and probably outside our communities ends up in some ways sort of actually creating a barrier to really seriously grappling with cultural change inside our institutions, really proactively improving police community relations. So I'll stop there and would love to hear other folks' thoughts about any of that.
Yeah.
You go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to build on what you were saying, culture is not only about the police culture, but also the culture around the city that you're in. When places try to switch to a community-oriented policing platform. That is exactly what you're trying to address as part of the culture of the officers understanding what the community's needs are and hearing it directly from them. There's no better way to learn and understand your past failures than an individual telling someone else how they were impacted by something that the police department did or what their family experienced. All our, police officers are human, and that's the part which I think recently is people are forgetting some of this stuff. It doesn't matter if you replace all those officers and brought in a whole new batch of officers, they're still going to be human. And so you still need to, get them to understand the expectations and understand personally why they need to understand why it is that we need to, keep police around what the community wants and needs, and so there's so much involved. It's such a complicated issue. When I talked about culture change, it's that one of the things I heard is that it doesn't work. Police can't police themselves. The reality is police has evolved over many years, but for, consent decrees and things like that, I wouldn't even be on this job because, people of color weren't even allowed on. And that's, within a 30-year period, right? And so now you get officers on and it starts to be diverse. And now it starts to grow a little bit. Within the culture of policing, you have people that are different that have an opportunity to have an impact on the others that are there. And so, not a lot of police departments are very diverse, period, right? There's not, although we have policies and procedures more so now than ever before, what I talked about, the missing link, which I say has never been done, is the building up of the management skills of the people in between. One of the things is they've never, you tried it and this didn't work. No, we never tried it. A lot of the things that we can actually put in place to help professionalize policing, it might be in policy, but it's never in actual action because unfortunately there's a financial piece to it that maybe not everyone has the stomach to really, gear up to, like, what does that cost? I don't know. And I hate to say it, in a lot of ways they say, well, they're just the police. Just tell them what to do. It's not that simple. If you could just tell somebody what to do, every organization would be good, right? How many organizations out there, they go belly up? If we were private sector, if you don't do all what it takes to make your organization good, you just go bankrupt. Well, police aren't that way, right? We're a government agency. It keeps flowing. It's like an entity it's very difficult to stop. You have to invest in the people there. You have to treat it like a profession. You have to take it seriously. You have to not, and I don't mean to say micromanage, but the fact is you hold the people at the top accountable. And then you give them the resources and the ability to do the things that they need to do to fix it. And if they don't, you take their head off and you get somebody else to do there, or you do what you need to do. But in a lot of cases, that's not the case because sometimes the people at the top don't have the ability to make those changes. Sometimes they don't have the resources to make those changes. And if you don't have the commitment from above you, beside you, within the community, you can't change culture, right, at all.
I want to jump on that one because I think maybe it'd be better for me to say that. So when I talk to people about this, what I say to them is I feel like working with the police chief is one thing, working with patrol officers and officers as a whole is another thing, and working with police unions is a whole nother thing, right? And so in my mind, I see them as three separate things. Obviously, that Venn diagram overlaps a bit, right? And I'm going to say that when I think about training, when I think about some of the things that both Sheriff Clayton and Chief Cox talked about, I think about money and I think about racism. So I do worry very much about, so I think we're all aware, everybody on this call is probably aware of, the duality of African-American police officers, African-American law enforcement executives, right? Like chiefs and sheriffs who are elected or appointed. And one of the things that we want is nobody wants to end up in 5-10 years with municipal police forces that are all comprised of only white supremacists, because that's the only person who wants to be the police anymore, right? Nobody wants that. So Chief Cox and I have conversations all the time about what's going to happen, because a lot of Black folks don't want to be the police right now, right? right? And how that is actually problematic for everybody, right? And I worry about Black law enforcement executives being set up to fail, right? So being appointed, being elected, and then not giving them the resources they need. That is a great concern to me, because I do think, so Chief Cox has said in other venues, and he probably said it here, that he stayed on the police force because he wanted to change it from within, right? He can't do that without the support of this city council, because this is where we are today. He can't do that without funding. And so I have been in the position recently saying, you know what, I kind of think there are some degrees to which police might need more money. Now, I don't want to, that does not mean that I don't think, so I worry about the defund the police thing, not because I don't agree with the sentiment of it, but I think you could probably take all the money from the Ann Arbor Police Department and still not have enough for the social services we really need. And I think that is the part of the thing we're not talking about, is how those things were gutted by municipalities. And now what you do have is the only people who answer the phone at 3 a.m. are police. So when you have a mental health crisis, that's who goes, right? That's the problem. You need mental health professionals able to go, but you're going to need a bunch of things around that too. So you're going to need some 24-hour cadre of people whose job that is to do that. If they're not sure, and this comes up, and I know everybody doesn't want to admit it, but there are times when they don't want to go to a scene without the police because they don't feel safe. How are you going to navigate that? And we just need to be honest about that. We're all like, oh, we need more social workers, send them out unarmed. I think that works. We see that model work in some places, right? And that's absolutely appropriate in some places. In other situations, it might not be. I'm not sure all police have to be armed at all times. I understand they feel naked if they don't have their gun. And I know that, after 9/11/01, we say, well, Ann Arbor Art Fair, those officers could never shoot into a crowd, but they have to be there and be armed because they're a soft target. There could be a terrorist attack, right? The big house could be a terrorist threat. And so we need people around there who are armed. I understand that's an argument. And I understand that's one position. I'm not sure how I feel about the statistics of the likelihood of those things. However, one thing happens and everyone's like, why weren't they armed? Why couldn't they? Right. So, but I think we have to have those conversations. And I think we also have to talk about racism. And I think we have to talk about how lots of times we see law enforcement executives of color who aren't supported. Right. And we had some struggles with that in Ann Arbor. Obviously, it's not news to anybody here. I am for some immediate change. Absolutely, hands down, I am. I am also not unaware that changing a culture takes time, but I do think we have to start now. And I think we have to be serious about what we do now. So I think there are incremental changes that have to happen, but there are also changes that have to happen right now. And so I think both of those things are true and both of those things are possible. But we have to, we not only have to have the money, we have to have the backbone to do that. And that means a lot of times. So I often say the easiest part of my job is working with the police, right? I have a harder time working with politicians because they have some very different interests. I'm not a politician. I'm never going to be a politician. And so I have a very narrow focus. I'm thinking about the community. I'm thinking about the police. And I want to pull in what Nora said about trying to heal communities. And so it is great to go ask communities what they want, but it's also unfair to ask them to behave and to work in such a way that we sort of ignore 400 years of historical trauma. Sure, you've never been beat up by the police, but you may know somebody who has. We all have stories. We've all seen things. And so I understand we watched George Floyd and that didn't happen to you, but for a lot of people that feels personal, right? And so I think we have to go into communities and those communities need to have the power and the voice to say what they expect from their police. But then when we do that, you can't then turn around and ask them to act like, oh, you guys are starting at zero, because people are not starting at zero. They are starting with a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. And the last thing I want to tie into that trauma piece is police trauma, right? So we got a bunch of police officers who don't get enough sleep. As a scientist, I understand that if you don't get enough sleep, you rely on your implicit biases more. What are we going to do about that? What are we going to do about police who feel triggered or feel oppressed or feel rightly or wrongly, I'm not taking a position on that, by all the events that are happening today? This sort of, now we got to close ranks, we got to double down, we got to be even harder than we were before because everybody hates the police. Everybody doesn't hate the police. Hillard Hines' report says in Ann Arbor, 85–90% of people love the police here. It's just communities of color and some lower income people who've had encounters with the police that don't love the police. And so how do you navigate that in Ann Arbor? And so I think these are complicated questions that we don't talk about. And I think when we do talk about it, we talk about them on the surface and we're not particularly honest about them. And so I think that's what we need to keep doing.
I think I'm going to jump in here. Lisa, thank you very much for that. I don't want to let us off the hook. Like Jerry promised that he was going to talk about the police union part, and I do want to hear that part from all of you as that. And also, Lisa, you had mentioned that, you intervened after some effort to raise some issues about contract negotiations. I'd like to know, like, what were those things that you prioritized? What did you see that needed to be changed? But I first want to go to Sheriff Clayton, and then maybe we can come back to others on that. And then we're going to be out of time because we promised to leave 15 minutes for Q&A. That gives us about 20 minutes or so.
Yeah, I think obviously labor plays an important part, and none of us have to, so we recognize that, and police unions are different. They just are different, and I think Nora laid out the historical perspective, right? And I've often wondered, I was our vice president of our command unit. I've often wondered, police negotiate politically to their own detriment when they align themselves with how they've aligned themselves in the past, because I've not seen the benefit. Just because people say they love you, their policies are oftentimes contrary. And I've seen the party that I'm a part of be more aligned with what is needed for folks at this level. But the more important piece is, as we're talking about change, and Dr. Jackson's talked about this in terms of the three parties, labor plays a big part. But I don't think we should let the elected officials off the hook. I'm going to say this and I'm going to keep saying it. Most collective bargaining agreements are three-party agreements. So at the county, it's a three-party agreement. I actually and our team sit down at the table and negotiate with the county and our union on the outcomes. And we talked about are some of those restrictions on disseminating information to other agencies and all that other kind of stuff in our collective bargaining agreement. They're not. So if you look at our collective bargaining agreement, most, if not all of the things that cause people issues around discipline and getting fired from one place and going to another, those aren't in our collective bargaining agreement. Now, in the municipal space where most police departments reside, the chief may be sitting at the table. Oftentimes, my experience is they're not. It's the mayor or city manager and a council person and labor negotiating these things that now the chief has to execute. And maybe they go back and confer with the chief after the fact. But these things that we're talking about that we believe are issues in terms of properly holding police accountable, those are elected officials. And I'm gonna say this, and I don't care who it offends, I'm just gonna say it. These are some of the same officials, when there's a protest, stand up at the podium and say all the things that are wrong, but you negotiated some of this stuff. So I think it's fair to have community as part of this discussion. We haven't had that in the past, but I'm open to it moving forward. And as a county sheriff, I sit a little differently. I don't have board telling me what to do, but they haven't had to tell us what to do. I mean, we're the ones that are going to do the 21st century community. So this oversight deal, oversight is good, but can we have the community involved on the front end when we're developing policy, when there hasn't been a mistake? We all know when things go sideways, emotions get in play and people react, but can we do it on the front end? So I'll end that piece on the labor. I'll add one more thing. This reparations piece in Chicago, that is an example of not disinvestment. It is an example of enhanced investment. Here's my problem with the whole, let's shift money from the police to somewhere else. You're still not supporting disenfranchised communities. All you've done now is take money and listen, when I go to most of the communities that we serve, especially Black and brown, some socioeconomic challenge, those people aren't telling me, Sheriff, I want less of your people. They're saying, Sheriff, I want your people and more of them. I just want you to treat us right. So let's not get it confused around this whole, let's disinvest. The people that are saying defund, most of them live in neighborhoods where they can walk at night, jog in the morning, have their kids out, sit on their deck, sit on their porch. They're talking about defund. I don't hear a lot of that from the people that need the police the most. I do hear them saying, stop killing us, stop disrespecting us, stop treating us in an inequitable way. But they're not saying go away, because those are the folks that need us, and we need to be cognizant of that. So I want us to have systemic investment. Invest in the police like you're supposed to, but now let's invest in those historically in disenfranchised communities the way we should, and stop propping ourselves up and feeling good about ourselves because we took money somewhere and put it somewhere else. I don't think that's appropriate. And I see that mostly in progressive, liberal communities. You know what I'm not hearing defund the police? In conservative communities where they basically said, I don't hear you. So I've been in some of these meetings with some of my sheriffs that represent conservative communities. They're not dealing with any of this stuff. And those are the places that when my sons drive through, I most worry about. So they get a pass. And we're spending, I'm not saying we should be held accountable. Please do not misunderstand me. We need to have this in Washtenaw County and in Ann Arbor for all the reasons that Nora said. Because we have this I'm gonna say one more thing that may offend some folks, but heck, I'm gonna say it. I have found in my life, my 55 years, the most dangerous racism has been liberal racism because it's unrecognized racism. And we as African Americans don't need to be taken care of and spoken for and treated like kids. We need to be valued as equal human beings. And oftentimes in our most progressive communities, that is not what I see, and that is not what I've experienced. All right, now I'm really gonna mute myself.
Good thing you're directly elected, Sheriff. Lisa, you or Nora, you.
Oh, I just wanted to say I just really appreciate those comments, Sheriff Clayton, especially your point that, you know, these calls to defund, like that can't be the period at the end of the sentence, right? It's reinvest. And just as you're, you know, for instance, in our own county, I agree with you that I'm hearing defund from a lot of white progressives. And I think, you know, in terms of getting down to nuts and bolts, like if you're going to talk about defunding the police, your taxes actually need to go up because we need to actually probably spend more than you want to redirect from police on essential services to communities that need them. So this becomes like a real dollar and cents conversation for municipalities when they are budgeting and reinvesting, that I think is for a lot of white progressives like an uncomfortable conversation, especially for those that kind of fall in that group of liberals that you're referring to. And I think it was really well stated and well put. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there so that we don't run out of time.
I think we're almost out of time because I misstated how much time we had a moment ago. We've really got about a minute. So maybe someone in the audience, or maybe Mary, in filtering through the questions, can ask a question that will allow Chief Cox and Dr. Jackson to get into the conversation, because there's things they still wanted to say, I know, that they didn't have time to say.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to get this one. I saw one question and it came out of kind of Dexter. And what the person wants to know, and you can speak to this, is that you have a system. Well, let me just read what he said. Let's see. Just a moment. I live in Dexter, a small, overwhelmingly white city with contracted county sheriff policing, while Chelsea, which is demographically similar, has its own police department. Please speak to what an effective citizen advocate for anti-racist policing looks like outside the county's urban cores of Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. And I'm going to say inside of the cities of Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti. What does an anti-racist citizens comment look like in terms of policing?
I'll take a stab at that.
Anyone? Chief Cox, Jerry, one of you take that?
I think Lisa said she was going to take a shot at it.
I can wave my.
Okay, I'm going to let them. We'll go to Lisa. Let's start with the police, actual police.
All right.
Yeah. So if I understand the question, it's, you know, what would anti-racism look like within the city of Ann Arbor? You know, as far as the police department. To me, it's going to look like a police department that understands the community it serves, where the officers actually have a relationship with every neighborhood, and you know, the people within the neighborhood, understanding their fears, their doubts, their worries, and their expectations, and so the officers understand it so much so that they will act upon that, because of the fact that they understand it on a personal level. And actually the culture in the neighborhood will understand who those officers are, because they will know them in some way, shape, or form, because they've actually built some type of relationship with them. So when you see an officer that goes down the street, if you don't know his name, you've seen him enough to certainly know enough about him where whether it's through eye contact or a conversation, that they're going to know who you are. And so when you have that kind of relationship, very rarely do people act out. Very rarely do people slip and allow the negative side of human nature to come out or whatever, even if they might be harboring some stuff that we might not ever be able to see, what goes on inside their head. And so the expectations of what we have for the public, the officers should know that. The officers should be out there and having conversations and be aware of exactly what people think about us and exactly what people expect from us. And the officers should be living up to those expectations. And so, and we should have conversations, good or bad, about all of these thoughts, so we can learn from one another. So that would be my, vision or whatever, or what that would look like, certainly in Ann Arbor.
I have nothing else to add. I'll defer to Dr. Jackson. That was well stated, Chief.
I think so. We're talking about anti-racism now, and that means I think to a lot of people much more than just not being racist, right? It means you're going to work against established systemic racism that has been present for in the culture. So it's not just in the police. The police are an expression of our culture, and it's easy to see white supremacy and racism there. It may be easier than to see it in some other fields where it exists all throughout our culture, right? So I posted a link to one set of tools. There's another one I have that's a more favorite one. But what it means is that people are actively working against it. And so I was going to jump on that statement because I thought they were asking about what a civilian participation looked like. I'm sorry. I did not realize they were asking what an anti-racist police organization looks like. So if that was the question, you could think about, like, at the very top, the chief, the sheriff, whomever that leader is, has a perspective on that. They have a long-term committed goal to inclusiveness, and they work that goal. They have to recognize contributions from people who have been historically excluded. That means people of color. That's also going to mean low-income people. There's some data that suggests that low-income white men are killed by police at rates similar to African Americans. We should look at that. Recruiting and retaining staff of color, underrepresented people, creating inclusive programs, two-way communication. One of you guys said it, but it is one of the most maddening things all my life for great white people to come in and fix a problem for people of color without ever asking us if we had that problem, what that problem was, how we'd like the problem solved. And that is just maddening. Okay, you were saying citizen. All right. So as far as citizens go, I think what has to happen is, I don't think politicians are going to change things because it's a good idea. They're going to change them because they're worried about keeping their office. And that means that people have to vote and people have to use their vote, and you and citizens have to come together and say, this is what we want, and voting for you is contingent upon that. And you have to be willing to execute that strategy. And so sometimes change happens with 5 really angry, folks who can then stir up 100 other people in Chelsea or Dexter or whatever that is. And I do think we have to think global and act local, right? So Oversight in Chelsea might look different than Ann Arbor. It looks different in Ypsilanti. It looks different with cable, with the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Department. And so I think it has to suit your community. I'll try to find the link, but there was, the University of Michigan had a police brutality teach-in, and the link is still online. It was on Coursera, and I did a couple segments on community organizing and organizing citizen oversight. And so I'll try to find that link and post it really quickly.
Just one thing on that note too, I think one thing that will be necessary for us to do anti-racist work around policing as white allies is to be willing to relinquish the white privileges that police protect. And that's, I mean, I'll name it, like, it's a tougher pill to swallow for a lot of folks. In a lot of ways, this links up to what I was saying earlier about really being able to put our money where our mouth is, right? And pay for services that our community needs if we want to reduce the amount of policing that happens in different communities. There's many, many ways historically and today that police protect white supremacy, protect white privilege. Even, just Lisa's example right now about foreground the voices of communities of color and listen to what they want rather than assuming that I or we as white people know how to fix policing. I think, white privilege comes in at all levels of our experiences. But even just, foregrounding voices of color is some of the most, or one of the first ways that I can think of. But I think that can be a really, it makes a lot of folks uncomfortable. It makes you really have to name kind of your own internalized racism, your implicit bias that I think Sheriff Clayton was talking to earlier. But that will be an absolutely paramount part of doing anti-racist police work among our communities. But it's a challenging one.
Ian, would you speak to how organized labor could help in this terms anti-racist citizens police / citizens police force?
Well, I mean, I would like to I think we need to listen. I mean, in the spirit of Nora's thing and what we've started here today, I think we need to continue to listen and discern out of that listening process what would be the kind of interventions we might try to make with political leaders that we endorse and help to get elected, and help to fund in some cases. What should our asks of them be? I don't think we necessarily know what to ask for at this point beyond we would like it to be different. We would like it to be like this, but that's not specific enough. We need to know, to go back to Lisa's thing, what needs to change in that police contract in Ann Arbor, if anything. Maybe it's okay. Jerry says that it's okay with the ones that are with the sheriffs. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. We need to know. And then if it isn't all right, we need to, build a majority coalition to support the changes that need to be made. So on that particular one, I'd like to toss the ball to Lisa and see what you would say, Lisa, needs to be changed in Ann Arbor.
If I could jump in on that one too, with regard to organized labor, I see kind of proliferating lots of various calls for police unions to be, expelled from AFL-CIO or what, right. And those are really, provocative campaigns. But my question is always, okay, so what? Okay, so we do that, so what? And I would rather see organized labor use our toolkit that we have, meaning organizing, meaning protecting workers' rights, meaning protecting the interests of working people to improve policing and improve police community relations. Because I think, that's what we're poised to do, right? Kind of draw on our toolkit and our skill set rather than, this sort of like yay or nay police unions, I think is ultimately like not really that productive of a conversation if that's where the conversation ends.
None of the police unions are completely autonomous from the rest of the labor movement already. So you kick out the other 20, what are you going to achieve with that?
Yeah.
It's symbolic maybe, but that's about it. But I still want to hear from Lisa on this particular issue of the bargaining.
So we could have made 100 asks, but we were told, don't even try, lady, or don't even try ICPOC. You're not going to get that. So narrow your stuff down. So we asked for 3 very specific things, even though I think we had a list of 7, but we shaved it down to 3. Number 1, when we get complaints of police officers, we'd like to see their names. That doesn't seem to be a lot to ask. But we'd like to see their names. Right now we get reports that say Officer 1 and Officer 2. So if I get 20 reports with Officer 1 and 2, I don't know if that's 40 different people or if that's the same Officer 1 and 2 every time. Citizens need to know that. We ask to be able to see that. Number 2, right now progressive discipline is based on looking at the behaviors or the conduct of an officer within the last 2 years. Now, granted, deputy chiefs and moving up to the police chief in Ann Arbor at least have the ability to say, we're not going to use progressive discipline, we're just going to implement this discipline. We ask that stand, that probably conduct for the last 24 months needs to be longer than that, that look back period
You're breaking up a little bit, Lisa.
For
Maybe if you turn off your video, then the audio will be clearer. Sometimes that can work.
I think it just froze.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Gosh,
Wow.
that's frustrating. Well, while we're waiting for Lisa to come back, maybe Chief Cox, or do you have any reaction to what Lisa was starting to say?
Yeah, well, I won't speak to the contract since I might be involved in some of that, but I will speak to, I think from a union perspective, unions and union organizations have a duty, I think, to mentor and develop the groups that are there. I think the business community learned a long time ago, or at some point, that you can do well and good at the same time, that you can do good for the public and also make a financial, living, so to speak. And until that happened, the culture of some of these places where it was just about money or bottom line, the reality is you can represent people in your membership and make sure that they're not taken advantage of and are healthy in so many different ways, and still yet do good in society. But that takes mentorship, that takes development, that's part of professionalism, and that's in every field. I hear there's a lot of talk about police, but the reality is the same tenets and things that make every organization better are the same things that will make the police organization better, because we are humans. We're all the same. And part of human nature, the things that make us tick, the things that motivate us, all those things are the same. But yet, when we come to policing, the expectation is totally different. People are going to make mistakes. The fact is, you want to limit those mistakes, and so there's some things that you have to do to make sure they're limited, but you have to build a culture where you want to eliminate those mistakes, and everyone should understand that and understand the importance of it. And I don't know if we're there yet. But this is a pretty big conversation, and I'm just so happy that I had an opportunity to begin this topic with so many of you all.
I'd like to say that I want to continue this conversation. We've done this in public, and that was a little bit wild, but that was good to be able to share these concerns and these ways. So that's good, but I do want to continue this after this is done, which is going to be in a minute. So do you want to say your third thing, Lisa? Are you back in connection again? We heard your first two asks.
Oh, did you? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
can.
The third ask was the end of binding arbitration for termination. So what we want is, if the police chief fires somebody, we want them to stay fired. It's really hard to fire police officers. It's really hard if the chief fires someone and they get their job back through arbitration. That's great for that person, but it teaches everyone else that a police chief firing you means nothing. My perspective is that person walks around emboldened more. And I understand you're like, well, what if you have an abusive chief? He could just be firing his enemies willy-nilly. That's the job of the municipality then, to deal with that person, to fire that person. But we've seen this in Minneapolis. That union boss is saying those 4 officers on George Floyd's back and neck, we want their jobs back, and we want them back now. We've had situations in Ann Arbor, I will not go into details, some of them are out there, where we've had officers who need to be fired, and the Ann Arbor Police Officers Union has tried to prevent that. And in some cases is successful in doing that. And so those are our 3 asks. They're pretty big asks. There are lots of other things we could ask for, but we could talk about it some other time.
Thank you. Thanks. Mary, I think I need to turn it over to you so you can wrap it up.
I want to thank everyone. Panelists, you all have been just awesome. Chief Cox, Chair Clayton, Nora, Lisa, Ian, you have provided the information that this community needs to move forward. And I can promise you we will continue this conversation with another program in the near future. With Zoom, of course, that's going to be a little bit easier. But I thank you all for giving up your Labor Day weekend. It is 12 noon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And thank you for spending it with the Washtenaw County Democratic Party. Take care. Bye.
Thank you,
you,
everyone.
Bye.
Be in touch.
Bye.
Absolutely.